Hello, my name is Brody Gasper, and today I will be doing my speech on the importance of history. After going through several years of high school, now a year of college, I feel that I have come to understand why history is so important to us in our everyday lives. When we think of history, we think of certain quotes that come to mind. One of these quotes by a man named Marcus Garvey, it quote goes, and I quote, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." Now, when he says this, I believe he means that a people who do not understand where they come from are doomed to survive. You cannot not know where you come from and hope to achieve anything important or great that can advance human society. So when I think of history, there's a multitude of things that it has impacted, but I believe three things that it has impacted the most is technology, geology, and the principles and foundations we have built our morals on, and the governments we have created to enforce those morals. So getting into technology. Nowadays, we have the blessing of using phones and computers and cameras that make living so much easier. Instead of having to write a paper, you can type one up where you can hit one button and delete a whole sentence instead of having to erase it and spend less time doing it. It is important, history is important to technology, especially in this regard to computers and phones, as without the people that have created it, such as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, if they had never come around and they had never put time and effort into it, we would never have Microsoft or Apple, which are two of the biggest technology companies nowadays that make computers and phones. Moving into medical technology, in the 18th century and 19th century, if you suffered perhaps a laceration or a gunshot wound to the leg, you would be required to amputate that leg to stop infection from setting in. Whereas nowadays, doctors have the ability to remove the bullet and clean the wound as to not allow infection to set in, meaning you get to keep the leg and you get to stay alive, which is obviously a bonus. Moving into military technology, which has definitely been one of the bigger things history has impacted, is nowadays, instead of having to send men in to do everything, we can send in unmanned vehicles that can take out our enemies far and abroad, where men no longer have to die doing the impossible per se. History has impacted technology deeply, but it has also impacted geology. Without history, we would not have the countries we live in nowadays, specifically the United States. If you look back in the history of the United States, you can very much see that everything we have, all of the expansion that has occurred, is all historical. If we did not have those men and events that occurred in the history of our country, we would not have this mighty nation that stretches for most of the North American continent, where there are so many different resources we can use, and that also goes into the geology of our world. Continents were made from rock layers that settled and water receding. Without history taking place here, we would not be able to have the resources we have. We would not be able to live where we do nowadays, which would make life much more difficult for us. Now, moving from geology into the principles and foundations of the morals we have today, we live in a country where we are governed by democracy. This can be traced back to the origins of Athens, where we have philosophers such as Socrates and Aristotle, where in Athenian society, it was set up that people could vote for their officials, and they had rights and privileges that we have nowadays. But if they did not have this and history was not allowed to evolve here, we would never have this form of government that has allowed us to persist in these times. Every government and moral idea that we have nowadays can't be traced back to this. Even bad governments can be traced back to uh, historical events that occurred in the past, such as the Nazis, which came from authoritarian thinking. Overall, history is very important. If we did not have it and we did not evolve upon it and grow it, then we would be in the same place where we were. History is also important to know because if we do not learn from it, then we are going to repeat it over and over again, especially the mistakes. And I'd like to end this speech with my favorite quote by far by a man named George Santayana, which says, "Those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it." Thank you.